Scream 6. Yep, we're back. Now, I originally shot this review and didn't edit that version of the video, and I was very scathing in my review of this movie. Didn't like it, that was my initial reaction, was against it, but in the time between me deciding to just goof off and not edit that video, I had more time to think about this movie, and honestly, I actually like this a lot more than I did Scream 5, so what I want to do is completely redo it, and I'll give you the positives and the negatives, and then we'll talk about what I think is wrong with the franchise right now. Now, I have some criticisms of the fact that this movie is located in New York, but again, we're in positives, not negatives right now, so I'm going to talk about right now at this moment the fact that there were scenes that were unique to New York that actually did work for the movie, so credit where credit is due. One of the things that's important whenever you have a movie take place in a major metropolitan area that's a specific major metropolitan area is you need things that specifically tie it to that area. So there's a sequence, I believe it's in the trailer, involving a ladder between two buildings. It was a fun sequence in isolation. Now, I do have a bit of a criticism for the lady who didn't make it through that, which is if you're ever on a ladder in between buildings, what you should do is hook yourself into the ladder so that way if the ladder gets thrown off, you can be carried into the apartment you're trying to get into, but that's not really important. It's a movie. Everybody relax. The second one that I actually really think was tied to New York pretty well was the subway sequence.
Guys?
And unlike the sequence as portrayed in the trailer, this one was actually better because there was two different subway carts, spoiler alert, that really amplified the tension in that moment. Now, there are scenes here and there that don't actually fit New York, but if you don't live here like I do, you probably won't notice them. First and foremost is the bodega owner scene.
Please help me. Just down
There's a line here, girl. You got a problem here, guy?
Where he has a shotgun. It's really difficult to get a firearm in the city of New York, and typically people behind the counter don't have firearms, so that one was a little bit breaking for me, but most of you probably wouldn't notice that. And there's another sequence later on in the movie where they're in Central Park and they get a call traced to West 96th Street, and for some reason, it goes from 12 o'clock in the afternoon, which, by the way, is acknowledged in the movie as the afternoon, broad daylight, because it's a callback to how Randy was killed in Scream 2. And by the time they get to that apartment, it's clearly 9 o'clock at night, and they drove, and I'm telling you, it does not take 9 hours to drive from anywhere in Central Park, no matter the traffic conditions, to West 96th Street. It's just not a thing. But again, those are stupid nitpicks that don't actually matter, and those are specific things that I thought about, and again, the day for night wouldn't have even bothered me that much if they didn't go out of their way to acknowledge that it was day. Your brain probably could have forgot about it, but I noticed it, and I thought it was amusing, but that's not really my main issue with the movie. Now, another positive for this movie is some of the returning characters. First and foremost, Jenna Ortega. Now, in my original review, I was hypercritical of this character not being killed or being the killer in the previous movie. This is because Jenna Ortega is the most famous person in this movie. She's not even considered the star of the movie, she's considered the co-star, but she's clearly being top billed due to her prominence, and typically, in Scream tradition, this character gets killed off. However, that's not happened because her celebrity is overwhelming the franchise, which again, is antithetical to Scream. Now, I said in my previous review, it made a lot of sense for her to be the third killer. I thought that was the direction they were going in because, again, typically, I don't want my Scream movies to prioritize star power over the actual plot of the movie. And by the way, this tone was set by Drew Barrymore, who was originally going to play Sidney Prescott, but when she read the script, she insisted that she would be the first person killed in the movie, so that way people would understand that absolutely anything could happen in this film franchise. That kind of is lost with Jenna Ortega's prominence, but that being said, she's one of the best actors, and considering her co-star, or the star of the movie, this woman can't move her face and is the worst character ever brought into a Scream movie, then we really just gotta appreciate what we need to appreciate. Also, they have this guy Chad that's in the movie, and I didn't care for him in the previous movie, but he has some charisma in this one, and I appreciate that. So for returning characters, pretty nice, pretty decent. And overall, for the final positive of the movie, I was really bored during the course of Scream 5. This movie was not boring. The pacing was much better, and it doesn't look nearly as cheap as the previous movie. For whatever reason, even though it's a Scream movie, the highest grossing franchise of slashers of all time, the previous movie was shot with close-up after close-up after close-up, which, if you don't know, is a really good way to save money when you have no budget. This one actually has the budget, you could see the budget, the pacing's better, it seems to work a lot better, so those are the positives. I'm being very positive about this, and I gotta get to the negatives because that's what this is kind of all about for you and my overall thoughts of the movie, but I also want to give the spoiler warning going forward because I'm going to talk about who the killers are and all that jazz. And I also want to thank my members over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join because, you know, you make the thing happen. So my previous video got clips of it taken out of context that went viral where I pointed out that the movie's meta commentary was completely off, and I talked about how diversity seems to reign supreme in these movies, in that in the previous movie, no minority characters were killed off, and the killers were white, and if you realize that they were following the basic rules of diversity, you could kind of identify the killers by who are the only white characters left, and that turned out to be true. It turned out to be Richie and this other girl as the killers in the movie. Now, in this movie, they do kill off some unnamed minority characters. It is a movie that takes place in the city of New York. I believe one named minority character also gets killed off, so they didn't really go as hard with the diversity message in this one. However, I never felt like there was danger for what is actually called in the movie the core four characters, the new core four characters, at all whatsoever. Also, there was one specific kill of a minority character, which was Gale Weathers' new boyfriend, who is a in-shape black guy. That was kind of ridiculous because the killer calls Gale and then says, oh, all his big muscles didn't help him. And Gale, in a very non-caring way, says, no, it didn't. And I laughed out loud, but we're not supposed to have main characters that are this desensitized to violence or this embracing of violence that they're going to joke about somebody they knew and cared about being killed off.
Hello?
Let's play a game.
You know you're like the 10th guy to try this, right? It never works out for the dipshit in a mask.
Maybe. But there's never been one like me, Gale.
It's actually one of the fundamental problems with this movie series, or this version of the movie series, and that is, despite what the writers and the people behind the movie say about how the original Scream movies don't glorify violence, and they want to stick to that, these movies actually do glorify violence in a bunch of different ways. Quote, before this on Ready or Not, we had this conversation a lot, which is how do we deal with violence? The violence in this, one of the big things we got from Wes Craven is the idea that you can never treat violence like it's happening to someone else. It has to always happen to a human being who has a family, who has loved ones, who you should care about. And so when you're in the violence, it's not for jokes, it's not for humor. Everything around it can be fun, but violence is violence and it should be treated as such. Now, that is a great quote that should denote some level of understanding of the philosophy of the Scream movies. And it does hold up in the original movies directed by Wes Craven. I mean, Sidney Prescott, when we first meet her, is not like the other kids who seem to be desensitized to violence by the movies due to the fact that a year before the first movie takes place, her mother was violently murdered, and she is currently going through the grieving process. Throughout the course of the original movies, the people who typically show no empathy for the victims end up being killers, and the one exception to that, sometimes, which is Gale Weathers, is somebody who is clearly and obviously putting up a facade that she has to overcome. However, in this movie, Gale jokes along with the killer for the audience about her unnamed boyfriend being killed, completely undercutting that. And by the way, that's something that happens throughout the course of the movie, especially considering that our main character is Sam Carpenter, the worst character ever to be put in a Scream movie. Now, I will get into that a little bit later on, but I also want to talk about something that I mentioned before, and I will mention it again, that these movies are essentially the plot line of Scream 4, aka the villain's plotline, Jill, Sydney's cousin. Spoiler alert for Scream 4, but you're watching a review of Scream 6, so you should have seen it. Now, if you guys don't remember, in that movie, it turned out that Sydney's cousin wanted the attention and fame that Sydney got. She believed that Sydney was wasting it moping around, not again empathizing with the losses and the tragedy and all of that. So she attempted to do a soft reboot of the franchise, bringing back the legacy characters, yet trying to make herself the new main character in the Stab franchise, which is what it's called in universe, aka the Scream franchise going forward. Now, that was the villain's plot. However, where we are right now is exactly that. So we essentially have the bad guy winning by the existence of these movies structured the way they are, where they soft rebooted the movie in the last one again. Again, this is one of the reasons why I hated 5 so much, because it was essentially a redo of Scream 4 without any of the awareness or the charismatic characters. And that's where we are in this franchise right now. That we have a new Sidney Prescott. We actually have 2 of them. In the last movie, we had 3 of them because the original Sidney Prescott was still around. But in this one, they went out of their way to disrespect Neve Campbell with a terrible offer, so she refused to return to the franchise. And they're just telling the story as if they don't understand that the soft reboot was treated with disdain in 4, and they're just moving forward. Now, I understand in practicality, this is kind of what you have to do if you want the franchise to go forward. You can't trot out all these characters old and repeat them over and over again in perpetuity. But yeah, that's really where we're at in terms of the franchise, and it's kind of disappointing. Now, Hayden Panettiere is also in this movie. She reprises her role as Kirby from Scream 4, and I remember when I was talking to a friend who's also a big fan of the franchise, and he told me that actually Kirby survived the Scream 4 death that actually occurred in that movie, and that's because Wes Craven said so she might be back in a future installment, and I responded to that friend with, oh, I don't care, because even though I like this character in that movie, we have a new character that's a movie buff that kind of fills that role, and I didn't think bringing her back would add anything to the story.
I hear you're a horror fan. It's been said.
Everywhere Friday.
Especially considering that in the Scream movies, typically, and by typically I mean 100% of the time, no returning character has ever been the killer. But she comes back, and now she works for the FBI, and basically she goes after Ghostface Isis, because that's a thing in this universe now, and I don't really care for her appearance in this movie at all. Now, also, one of my other criticisms of Scream 5 has returned again, which is it's not really about a meta commentary about horror movies and the state of horror anymore. Scream 5 was specifically about Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi of all things. The killer in that movie was a super fan of the Stab franchise, and the director of Knives Out, aka Rian Johnson, directed the 8th installment of the Stab movies and completely ruined the franchise. And because toxic man-baby fandom is a thing, that's why he decided to turn to be a killer. Now, this didn't make sense in universe, because if you know anything about the Stab movies as they exist in universe, they already messed them up. They already had time travel and all these ridiculous things.
It has nothing to do with Woodsboro. I thought you said Stab was based on true stories. The first 3, the original trilogy, is based off of Sidney Prescott. But then she threatened to sue them if they used her story, so then they just started making stuff up. Stab 5 has time travel, which is by far the worst.
So getting mad specifically at Stab 8 made no sense at all. And it's a weak motivation, and again, it's about defending Rian Johnson for Star Wars, and as somebody who doesn't give a damn about Star Wars, this is not interesting to me. I'm not about this life. I don't need you to be like, oh wow, Rian Johnson was totally right. Well, guess what? In this movie, they still double down on defending Rian Johnson and Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi.
He was so pathetic.
Is that true?
Yeah, your son. He was a man baby who made his girlfriend do all the killing.
And there are multiple lines in this movie that make reference to him specifically, and how franchises got to do what they got to do, again, defending Hollywood against the fandom, which wasn't really what Scream was about. It was more of a critique of Hollywood, and sometimes a critique of government actors that think that movies make people violent and the censorious nature of people, but instead they've completely inverted that, and they're still talking about Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. And this comes at the expense of any references that I could detect of horror movies that take place in the big city. If anybody knows anything about slasher movies, typically they really go to crap when they start transporting them from small town America to big city, yet there was barely any acknowledgement of this at all in the movie. So when you have something that's supposed to be meta horror and you don't really reference horror, you spend more time referencing and running defense for Rian Johnson's Star Wars movie, it just doesn't really seem all there. But whatever, it is what it is, and just like the last movie, this movie also has 3 white killers. As I predicted in the last movie, they would go to 3 killers, because I'm just naming the things that people think are creative, but are actually creatively bankrupt, that they're obviously going to lean to, and the 3 white killers are the 3 white named characters in this movie.
This isn't like any other ghost face.
What is this place?
A shrine.
And they turn out to be Richie's family because, you know, why not? And apparently during Richie's time being a super big fan of the Stab movies, he collected all of the memorabilia, including all of the things from the original crime scenes in all of the actual events, because he was able, even though he's the son of a cop, to have all the money to buy all of these things from the police, who would be charging a premium, because not only are these evidence, but they're also famous evidence. But I guess corrupt cops sold them all to this guy who was working at like a video store, whatever the hell he was working at in the last movie, convenience store, and he was able to build a shrine and have it warehoused in Manhattan. Well, but you don't remember Ghostface ISIS, that's why Hayden Panettiere's there. Also, if you're asking about other cartoonishly bad messaging, there is a scene early on, it doesn't really have major consequences for the movie, but I figured I'd bring it up, where Jenna Ortega, who is trying to get over what happened to her in the last movie because she was wounded a bunch of times, friends of hers got killed, and all of that, decides that she wants to go up to some guy's room and sleep with him. He says that he has a bottle up there they could drink more, and then they try to stop her because they're like, hey, that guy's actually quite date rapey. But Jenna Ortega says, no, I want to go up there. Like, she's consenting to the encounter. That's what she's into. She says, you should mind your own business. And then for no reason, the evil white date rapey guy grabs Jenna Ortega and like slams her against the stairs because, you know, he's the evil white date rapey guy. And the fact that she's consenting means he's not into it anymore. So he had to physically assault her. So you dum-dums out there in the audience could say, oh my god, that's the bad guy. That man bad man. Now this scene is already incredibly stupid, but to follow it up, then we have Sam Carpenter come in and tase him in the balls. And it's like, haha, date rapey guy who girl consented to sleep with, and then for no reason physically assaulted the girl, got tased in the balls. Haha, wow, comedy, fun, violence is comedy. Rah. Which brings us, of course, to our main character, to our lead, Sam Carpenter. I forgot what the actress's name, the lady who will not move her face, and I'm pretty sure they put CGI tears on, and somebody who undermines fundamentally what Scream is all about. Now, to be fair to this actress, this character in design is terrible. Now, if you remember my previous review, she is Billy Loomis's bastard daughter, who for some reason is seeing flashes of Billy Loomis directing her to kill. This is a terrible idea. Billy Loomis is not that important. Sure, Billy and Stu are the original killers for the original movies, but his original motivation was for the fact that Sydney's mom slept with his father, and that caused his parents to get divorced. But in these movies, for some reason, Billy Loomis has a psycho gene or something that is infecting his daughter, who, by the way, should be called Sam Loomis, but she's called Sam Carpenter because the father only found out that that wasn't his daughter later in life, and thus she is losing her mind, and there's all these hints that she's going to be a killer, and she's also seeing Billy Loomis, who she never met at all, to be clear, because he died before she was born, in flashback and in all the mirrors and all that. And the only reason she's seeing that is so that they could say, remember Billy Loomis? Remember Scream 1? Do you remember Scream 1? And it's just for the purpose of member berries. So anytime you have a character like that in your movie, it's going to drag down your movie. Now, there's a lot of propaganda on the internet talking about how Sam Carpenter is awesome. This is all manufactured. This is all fake. Nobody can believe this because this girl does not move her face, and as I said, her character just does not fit in this universe. It totally goes against the individualized motivations and essentially goes with this it's genetic kind of situation, which I'm not about for these movies. So we still have teases of her potentially being the killer, and there's talk about how the family of Richie is mad because at the end of the last movie, she stabbed up the hell out of Richie and then slit his throat. And that was over the top violent, so some people think that she actually turned out to be the real killer behind that, like it was her whole plot to kind of reboot the franchise and insert herself as the lead. So we have that, but of course that violence, that graphic violence, unlike in the previous movies where it's Sydney just putting down the killer, or Gail putting down the killer, or Dewey putting down the killer, is glorified as standing up to a man baby, and that violence is girl boss violence. On top of that, because they have all these collected pieces of memorabilia from the original killers, we know that there's going to be a scene in this movie where she puts on Billy Loomis's costume and carries Billy Loomis's knife, because again, the film wants you to say, "Member Billy Loomis? Member Billy Loomis's knife?"
Gotta lure him in.
Even though the thing about the costume and the thing about the weapon is that they were intended to be generic, they're only iconic because the Scream movies were successful, and having her do this kind of emphasizes and again glorifies the violence. And considering there's a whole scene where she's about to show mercy to the final killer after they kill off the other two and then doesn't, and Jenna Ortega kind of cheers her on as she's viciously stabbing the final killer, they really fundamentally miss the point.
You want me, so let's finish this.
Now again, the killers are bad people. They're not deserving of mercy, especially in a movie. We understand that. However, it would have been an actual subversion of what we expect in a Scream movie for any or one of the killers to survive, even though, by the way, this was actually intended with Stu from the first movie, but let's set that aside for a moment. And instead, we get this like glorified execution of this guy, not when he's posing an imminent threat like the way that the other killers were killed in the other movies, but it's glorified. And again, you go to that quote earlier on about how Wes Craven viewed violence and the philosophy of the series, and then you go to this and it's ridiculous. She even gets a girl boss speech before she does the kill. And that's not even to mention the fact that other killers in this movie essentially get killed by member berries. I mean, the last part of the movie takes place in a room with all the member berries from the previous movies, and it culminates with Claire Bennett, Kirby, whatever her name is in this movie, the returning character, flinging a TV across a room and killing one of the killers, just like Stu got killed in Scream 1, because remember Scream 1. Remember this? And again, there's just not commentary about the overuse of member berries. They're just doing it unironically, unaware of how dumb it is, how pointless it is, because this franchise has completely lost the core of the franchise, which again is meta commentary about horror. They're way too into defending Rian Johnson to the point where I think this series is directed by Rian Johnson's best friend or his PR team. Now, there are also fake out deaths in this movie, and by the way, that is not something that is new for the franchise, but one of the things that I kind of find hilarious about the fake out deaths in this movie is, one, they're almost identical to the exact fake out deaths, even to the characters from the previous movie. The Kirby character gets stabbed in the stomach because remember in Scream 4 where she gets stabbed in the stomach. In fact, they go out of their way to show us her scar on her stomach, and she's like, I got stabbed in the stomach, and then it happens again. The character that's supposed to be the movie buff replacing Randy, which was replacing Kirby's character because she was the Randy replacement in Scream 4, gets stabbed in the same exact place as well. And then the Chad guy, who gets a fake out death in the previous movie that I criticized, gets stabbed 800 times by 2 different killers, and he also manages to survive somehow. Now again, fake out deaths are not new to the franchise. They've happened before. I'm sure they will happen again. But don't give me all of these fake out deaths that are identical to previous fake out deaths in the franchise in a row consecutively, most of them taking place in the exact same location. The only one that is exempt from that is the fake out death that happens on the subway. So we have this repeating, rehashing of all of these things, and it's all for the purpose of remember this, remember the previous Scream movies, remember that this is kind of like that, except we're doing it a little bit different with these new characters that are supposed to be stand-ins for the old characters of the previous Scream movies. Remember the Scream movies? Now also, and I could be totally wrong about this, but I don't think I am, in the previous movie, they used that CGI de-aging technology to make Billy Loomis look exactly how he looked at the end of Scream 1, which of course failed miserably. He had a CGI monster face that did not look human at all. But in this movie, he was shown in the reflection, and it seems like they didn't even bother to do that with the actor. So instead, we see Billy Loomis, 20 years older than he ever was in universe, talking to this girl, convincing her to grab his knife, because remember Billy Loomis, remember his knife, and put on his costume for 2 reasons. 1, remember Billy Loomis, she's wearing Billy Loomis's costume. And 2, remember that scene at the end of Scream 1 where Sydney put on the costume and she started turning the tables on the killers? Remember that? But yeah, even though the CGI de-aging looked horrible in the previous movie, the fact that it looks like they didn't even bother to try for this movie just shows you how low effort this storyline is. But again, fundamentally, the idea of having Billy Loomis's daughter with a genetic predisposition to become the Ghostface killer is the worst idea humanly possible that you could have had. It's a fundamental mistake from top to bottom. It definitely should never have made the franchise, but because they wanted to do callbacks to previous movies, and they're like, oh, Billy Loomis is iconic, even though the thing about the Scream movies is that the killers are different every single iteration. Wow, remember Billy Loomis. So overall, this is basically what I expected from this movie. It was more entertaining, but the problem is that the foundation was rotten, and of course, they kind of lost the whole point of not glorifying violence. On top of that, they are obsessed with defending franchises and studios that kill off their character, chief among them Rian Johnson's Star Wars Episode 8 The Last Jedi, which really shouldn't have much to do with Scream. I mean, you can reference and talk about other movies, but when you do slasher in the big city, and you have almost no slasher in the big city movie references, you're kind of just not following the formula to any sensible way, and it's not like you're doing it in an uncreative way. It seems like you're doing it in a I don't understand what the purpose of this franchise actually is way. Like I said before, Jenna Ortega, who should have been killed off in the opening scene of the last movie, or should have been one of the killers because she had the best motivation, as Sam Carpenter is what split up her family and ruined her life, is one of the better actresses in this entire film, even though her character shouldn't exist, and kind of shows how bad Sam Carpenter actually is every time they're on screen together. So yeah, this goes in the better than 5 category, but still not very good. Obviously, Scream 3 is one of the messiest of all the films due to the studio interference, so that one doesn't really count, but overall, it's among my least favorite of the Scream movies. But, you know, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about Scream 6, because I guess it had to come out. Till next time.